So you got to get out of the idea that who I am is my identity, and into the idea that who I am becoming is who I really am, right? Because bridging that gap is how you get there. And the way that you get there is through creating first disciplines.
Well, Andrew, thanks for meeting with me today and jumping on this podcast. This is going to be really fun because we met, gosh, must have been 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago.
I think it was 3 years ago, actually. I think
Wow.
I think it was 22. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And then we saw each other, at the arena conferences and then different things. And then recently we really got to hang out and do more work together as we did the No Podium conference.
Yes.
2 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard to believe. And it was fun. It was a fun experience. I was just blown away by everybody that was there. Your talk was just unbelievable. I think I've referenced it, I don't know, probably half a dozen times with companies I've been working with about your slope. I couldn't remember if it was like slope of terribleness or slope of awfulness. I can't remember what you said there, but I thought that was just fantastic. So anyway, thanks for being here. And I'd love just to get to know people first off. And I know we've had these conversations before, but tell me about your background. Like, where are you from and where are you at? What are you doing? All the things.
Oh, where am I from? Well, I was born a very small child in rural Nebraska, and very quickly kind of moved out to California, which is where I've lived most of my life. But a lot of my story starts down in Southern California, where I met my wife and where I went to school, studied down there at Pacific Christian College and then at Cal State Fullerton, and worked in Hollywood for a couple of years. And my background in school is in theater, and I got a job right out of school working in Hollywood, and I did that hustle for a few years, and then taught acting in LA for a bunch of years, and then decided we wanted to settle down and start a family, and we moved back up to California's Central Valley, which is where my family is from.
Okay.
Yeah, and we've kind of settled here ever since. So this is where I am, and in that transition is where I made the transition from the performing arts world kind of into the business world, entirely by accident, which we can get into later. But
yeah,
that is what has brought me on the path to where I am now. So now I work almost completely with people in the business world and very little with the people in the arts world. So
yeah. That's great. So what did you do? I mean, when people say they work in Hollywood, that means a lot of, because people that don't really know anybody in the industry, it's just like, oh yeah, people just make movies and it's just actors. Well, no, there's a ton of people that make it happen. So what did you do in Hollywood?
The first job I had is I got a call. I was actually in my 5th year of college, and I got a call from a mentor of mine, and she said, "Hey, I'm a casting director. We're working on some film projects. I need an assistant. Will you come and help me with casting these productions?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. That sounds fun. That sounds great." And I went and helped her. Her name is Bev Holloway. And people who are familiar with projects like The Chosen may have heard of her. She's the one who casts all of those the really large scale faith-based projects. Now, back then we were very small by comparison, but she's gone on and made a huge name for herself. And I'm really grateful to have gotten to spend the time with her, because I learned a ton about selecting people through that process. But yeah, so she brought me on as an assistant, and I went on to become a production assistant and then an assistant director, and kind of worked my way up through the behind the camera ranks. So I didn't spend any time in front of the camera in Hollywood, but I spent a ton of time making the magic happen, I guess, as they say. But it was fun, but it's hard work.
I was going to say, I think that's the other thing too. I didn't have an appreciation until it was my brother-in-law, and he worked in Hollywood and for a while. And it was just amazing to see how much, and he was just but he was a cameraman. But then seeing like the art behind that, even like how he's constantly like analyzing shots, what makes sense, the lighting. I mean, just all the pieces that go to it is just unbelievable. It's an amazing feat. And for, again, people that are in the industry, they're just it's another day at work. But for people that aren't in the industry or have no connection with it, like I didn't, I was shocked at how much went into it. So,
Yeah, it's crazy.
um,
The
yeah,
guys who do the technical stuff, especially, are some of the smartest people you will ever meet in your entire
man,
life,
yeah,
and a lot of them are really humble about it too, which is kind of a cool thing.
yeah,
They don't make a big deal of it. So
sure. And so when you were in school, like what was the dream? Like what was the ultimate for Andrew when you're fifth year and you get this call? Like, were you wanting to be that, like be this super duper director, or where were you wanting to go?
not really. I don't think I had a great idea of what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be in the performing arts. I'd been an actor coming up through college and had done some work professionally in that area. I'd done a little bit of directing and things like that, but I didn't really have designs on, you know, being in front of the camera in film or directing in film. I was kind of in a spot where, again, I was in my fifth year of school with no end in sight. And so for me, it was, well, here are the options. I could continue to spend money learning to do something in the performing arts industry, or I could go and get paid money to do something that I've
Yeah,
been learning how to do for the last how many years. And so I chose the latter, and there have been good things and bad things about it. But, I was so young at the time. I was 20, 21, 22 years old when this was going down. I didn't really have an idea of what the pattern of my future was. What I did have was a sense that I needed to do something that was different from what I had grown up seeing all around me, if
mm.
that makes sense.
Yeah, which was what? Like, what did I guess? What? Yeah, what were your parents'
Yeah.
background?
So,
Yeah,
so my background, my dad is my dad's a pastor. He's been a pastor for 50 years, and his dad was a preacher, and my mom had three brothers. They were all pastors at some point in their lives, and I actually went to college to become a pastor myself. And the story that I tell about that is I did very briefly in between things. I did briefly graduate. I got out of school and took a job as an assistant pastor at a church, and it took me about a year and a half to get fired from that job. So I learned very quickly that was not going to be the path for me. That was not going to be the way for me. But I had a deep connection to the arts that was really important to me. But what it became was a deep connection to being able to help people find things that they didn't know they had. And I think that turning point really came when I weeded my way through the Hollywood mess and started teaching. And when I started teaching, I was teaching acting to kids primarily, high school and all the way down. And when I would work with those students, it was as if something turned on, like I was kind of all of a sudden in the place that I needed to be. Like all of this training and all this stuff that I had gotten, now it kind of made sense as to why I had all that knowledge, because I knew I wasn't going to use it myself. I was never going to hit it big in Hollywood as an actor. But as I was seeing these kids develop in ways that they did not anticipate, or ways that they couldn't see themselves developing when they walked in. And when I saw them walk out with a different picture of who they were and who they could be, I think that was the beginning of the journey down the road to where I am now. Um, yeah, and that's kind of what that time in my life did for me. It positioned me to be able to learn that and see that.
yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, the whole concept of this whole podcast is Ray and I were figuring out what we want to call it, and the idea of the choice being, it's amazing as you look back at life and the different choices and the different paths that people go down. So that's one aspect, the big five decisions: where you're going to live, what are you going to do for work, are you going to get married, have kids, all those things. But then also the insignificant small choices and directions, and helping people see that. So I guess is a good segue to, what do you do now? And how does that translate? Because you're saying you moved to the business world, and yes, Hollywood and the arts, they are a business as well. But yeah, what is the thing that you're doing now specifically, like with teams?
Yeah, so now I run a company. I started a company just briefly after or before I met you. I can't remember which site it was, but I started a company called the Idea Training Academy, and we're a coaching and consulting firm. We work with individuals, primarily executives or leaders, who are stuck, who feel like they've got a higher ceiling but aren't sure exactly how to position themselves to get to it, or who just feel like they're spinning their tires in the mud. And then we work with organizations also who have great missions, but don't have their hands around the organizational health piece of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And because of that, they have a great mission to pursue, but they just don't, they're spending so much time chasing their tails that they don't know how to get there. So we help kind of straighten things out for them, organize things for them, and help them see what a better future looks like when they're not just doing the daily work, when they can do the actual work that they wanted to
Sure.
do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, and how did that come to be for you? Just one day you just woke up and you said, "Hey, I'm going to go help businesses and
More or
executives."
less. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
so post Hollywood, I spent 10 years in sales and did the whole run of things in sales management and the door-to-door thing and the whole nine yards. And after that, moved into the financial world for 10 years. So I was in banking for 10 years as well. And coming out of those, I moved into the nonprofit sector. I started working for a local community-based organization and helping people get connected to the resources that we had in the community, people in need in all kinds of different ways. And seeing and touching those types of organizations, that was when I realized they don't, a lot of those people's, a lot of those companies, they don't have anybody who is in their corner to help them figure things out, to help them put those puzzles together. And a lot of the leaders in those organizations feel like they don't have the benefit of getting the kind of coaching or support that they need to become better at what they do because they're so busy in those activities. And so as I was taking a look across that playing field, and as I was thinking back to what I had done over the previous 20 years, what I realized is all I had spent my time doing, all I had been successful at doing was helping people find the way through the place they were to the place that they wanted to be.
Yeah.
And so between that and intersecting with individuals like yourself at the arena and just being in the right places at the right time, it made sense to make a step in a direction that put me in a position to support the things that mean the most to me, and that's the people that are doing the good work in the world. So
That's cool. So so when you are working with organizations, do they primarily seek you out, or, and then what is that like values or mission alignment that you're looking?
yeah, they do primarily seek me out. I work with a lot of organizations in my immediate community. You
Nice.
know, a lot of what I do is just word of mouth because these organizations, especially community-based organizations, are by necessity they're connected. They're in networks. They work together. They support each other because to be honest with you, funding is hard to come by in that world. And the people who are doing the work that's the closest to the people who need it the most often are the people who are scraping by when it comes from a business standpoint. And so, you know, those are the people that I'm interested in working with because I want to help them not just scrape by, but become sustainable. Because there are ways to not make money, right? To, you know, to be a nonprofit, and to still be able to sustain a very, very large organization that's able to not only serve its community in the right way, but to fairly pay the people who work there. Because
Hmm.
let's be honest, those people deserve to get paid as well, if not better, than all the rest of us, because of the level of the work that they're doing. So yeah, so primarily you know, I'm working within the networks. People find out about me and hear, hey, this guy's got a system that will help you move from kind of where you're at to the next place where you need to go. And wherever I am called upon, that is where I go. And that has included small local nonprofit organizations. It's included county governments. It has included. I've had at least one contract with a federal agency that I can't
Nice.
talk about because
Sure.
that sounds cool. If I can't talk about it, it
That
sounds
sounds
cool.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can. It's not anything that exciting, but so I go largely where I am needed, but people are finding it, and people seem to have the need right now. I think that when the world has gone through as many of the weird turmoil things as we've been through in the last 5 years, people start looking for one of two things. They either start looking for comfort, for ways to become comfortable, or they start looking for ways to become meaningful. And I saw a lot of comfort seeking from people coming out of the pandemic years. There was a lot of comfort seeking and a lot of people saying, "Oh, we need to get back to healing, we need to get back to self-care, those kinds of things." But over the last couple of years, I have seen a shift towards people who are seeking meaning. They've spent so much time taking care of themselves that they're starting to awaken to the fact that there's a world that they can have a direct impact on, but they don't know
Yeah.
how to do it, right? And so
Mhm.
that's part of where I come in my idea framework, which is the core of what I do. The Idea Training Academy. The idea is an acronym. It stands for identity, disciplines, execution, and accountability. And that framework right there is something simple and stupid that anybody can pick up and get better tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, it's an interesting shift for sure, because I think you're right. And there was also this, I don't know what you're finding with companies, but the companies I'm working with, it's seeming that people are able to talk more straight to people now than they were a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And I don't know a better way to say that except for people don't want to be pandered to. It's kind of what I'm feeling. They just want somebody to tell them like, "Hey, this is how it's going to be,
Yeah.
and this is how it is," and just kind of like the defining. I heard John Maxwell say years ago that one of the primary jobs of a leader is to define reality.
Hmm.
And when we don't do that as leaders, and we kind of shirk that responsibility, and we placate or we pretend that the reality in front of us isn't actually the reality in front of us, it can make all sorts of terrible decisions because bad data or whatever is pushing us in different directions. But yeah, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. And what do you? I mean, what the one of the things that I thought of when you were asking that, or when you were talking about that, is with the teams. I guess what are you seeing primarily that are their motivators? Because if you're talking about seeking meaning, like what is it? I guess is there an underlying motivation behind that you're seeing, or is it just that they've done all the comfort things and they've run out of ideas, and so now they realize that that isn't actually giving them fulfillment? Or
I think it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of people coming to an end of comfort and saying, well, there must be something more than that. But I think you hit on it when you talked about the fact that people want to be talked to straight now, seemingly more than ever, at least in my lifetime. And I think one of the big reasons for that is that if you look at everything that you have access to, not only is it slanted or potentially artificially created, but we're aware of that now
hmm
in ways that I don't think we've been before. And so I think there's an expectation of artificiality that happens in the world. So we see a politician talk, and we don't believe what they say because we know that they're only going to say it as long as it serves their purpose. We see an ad, we see a Coca-Cola ad, and every one of us can tell that it's AI generated right now, right? And I think that there is a shift. There is a pendulum swing that is coming away from that level of artifice and back to just the real. And that's why there's I am seeing with these teams this deep desire to move away from the Zoom meetings, which
hmm
don't get me wrong, we all love. My joke is that I work remotely because I don't believe in wearing pants, right? So everybody loves being in the comfort of their own home, but there's a desire, there's a yearning to get back together, and it's not a back to office thing.
right.
It's a I just want to sit across the table from you so that I can pick up all of the cues that I need to from just the relational, the body language, from the tone of your voice. I want to get out of these boxes that we've been in and back in front of people because that's where I can know what's real. Like if I can put my hands on it, I'll know it's real. And I think that people not just want to know what's real, I think they want to be real and they want to be seen as real. And that's the change in the motivation maybe that I'm
Mm,
that I'm seeing over the last couple of years.
yeah. That's a really good perspective. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, with my background with robotics and artificial intelligence and neural networks, and we were doing this 10 years ago.
Hmm.
Kind of before. I mean, everything's AI now. Most of it's marketing, but it's not real. But the interesting thing, and I talked about this a couple of years ago when ChatGPT was first becoming a thing. Before people really knew what was gonna happen. And I essentially said, I think that in the next 5 years, what's going to happen is, yeah, we're in this honeymoon phase with AI. And so you've got the adoption curve, right? And so you've got all these people that are jumping on board, and it's the coolest thing. But then I think you're right. I think what's going to happen is you're going to kind of see this bifurcation. And I'm already seeing it with my kids and their friends,
Hmm.
with younger and then going up. Because right now you see that Gen Z, we realized with Gen Z, because they were the first experiment, like maybe we shouldn't give everybody a smartphone when they're 12, and so now that we've had that cycle, now people that have kids that are 5, 6, I've got a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old. So my 5-year-old and my 12-year-old, I'm like, sorry guys, you don't get Snapchat. You don't get nothing. You get a flip phone that is locked down to do nothing.
Right.
It's boring, right?
Right.
But because of those things that we learned, I think in the same way with artificial intelligence, that yes, it's going to become very helpful in some very key ways, but the danger is if you just offload all of your thinking to AI. Like that's the thing that I'm most nervous about. So no, you got to bring your brain with you, and you have to be able to push back on those things. And as this bifurcation is happening, there's people that are moving more and more and more into this digital world, and they're going to get sucked in, and they're not going to realize what is reality versus not. They're literally going to live in the matrix in the real world. But then the other side of that is there's going to be people that are going to reject that so hard that they just want something real. They just want the out of tune guitar around a campfire, right? Not the production and everything that you hear on Spotify and whatever else. So anyway, that's very interesting, and it's true too. When teams ask me and they say, "Hey, can we just do this Zoom?" I was like, "Not really. You really want to sit in an all-day meeting and really work out hard conversations over Zoom? I don't think so. Like it just doesn't work. It's not the same. It's a great tool. I'm glad that we're doing this, via technology, so we can have this conversation. But
of course, yeah.
I also know you, and I've given you a hug. You're a real person, so it's a very interesting. It's an interesting time that we live in for sure.
It is, and there's a middle ground to that, right? Like it doesn't have to be the Matrix or the Revolution. Somewhere in the middle of that, there's a world where we have tools that we can put to use, and we can make our lives easier. We can make our lives better. We can offload parts of work that are tedious and unnecessary to automation, and still retain a sense of what makes us unique and what makes us individuals. And those are the spaces that I'm really interested in capturing, right?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, because those are the things, like you said, it's back to the rawness, realness. Even silly as it sounds, I was thinking this morning, getting ready, how saying bad words when I was a kid was a bad thing.
Yeah.
And now it's you couldn't put it on ABC, NBC, CBS, but now every podcast, well, most of the podcasts I listen to, there's language in it. And I don't even think twice about it anymore. And it doesn't offend me. I don't necessarily use that language myself, probably just because I still have this like guilt twinge thing, because my dad was a pastor as well. And if he ever listens to podcasts, I gotta have a bit of a clean mouth.
Right.
But it is interesting how that real rawness, and it's that trust factor where people want to know, like, are you legit? Are you a real person? And not just real like in the artificial, technology sense, but are you actually who you say you are, and you're going to be genuine, and then have people like draw that. And I think that in my mind, the offloading, like you said, to technology of the tedious tasks, the dumb, dangerous things that we don't necessarily need people to do, that when that happens, that it will allow for humans to human more and better, because they don't have to be stuck in the tedious and the mundane, and they can actually do things and turn on their brains in a new way. I'm hopeful. I mean, that's the hope that I see with technology. But it was interesting in that same vein, because your talk at the No Podium conference was on, the myth of the real world. And I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit and talk about that, because it was fascinating. So
Yeah, 100%. So in brief, I believe very strongly that there are three very core things that keep a lot of people from advancing forward, and those three things are shortly. The first one is the belief that success is an accident, that people fall into success, that people get lucky, that there's divine intervention, whatever, right? But the failure to understand that it's a result of choices and decisions and actions that we take along the way. The second one is the belief that failure is fatal in some way and that we must avoid and cover it up at all costs. And the third one is the myth of the real world. And the myth of the real world says, yeah, I know that there is great advice out there. There are books that are written on exactly my problem. There are coaches that I can hire who could tell me what's going on. There are consultants who could come in and explain everything to me. But, I live in the real world. And in the real world, those things don't really affect because I have circumstances that are different that they wouldn't understand. And there's this concept that my perception is the real world. And it fails to understand that perception is based on all kinds of falsehoods to begin with. That no two of us live in the real world, that your eyes and my eyes see the color blue in entirely different ways. What I am calling blue could be green to you, and we would never know it because we have a shared language for something that is universal in the world,
Yeah.
but that you and I experience in entirely different ways. And if I'm so set on the fact that my perception is the real world, that the things that are within my lane of vision are the real world, then I never grow because I never allow those things that can help me grow into the inside. So that's kind of the summary of the of the concept. And the idea is that if you want to set yourself up for growth, then what you have to do is you have to affect the three things that comprise your real world. The first is your environment, and your environment is it's the place you put yourself into. That's the raw material, the raw data that comes in, and that's where the slope of terribleness, which I will credit Cal Newport, who's the
Okay.
one who
Okay.
came up with this. But the slope of terribleness and the way that we get sucked into things like social media and the infinite scroll can affect us in a negative way because the environment seeps into us. It's raw data that we immerse ourselves into. But then, just like in the natural world, we take all of that information that comes in and it filters through our senses. Well, the problem is your senses, just like we talked about a second ago, are highly biased. Your eyes and my eyes are not the same. In fact, not only that, but your environment that you grew up in, your experience with things, all of those affect the way that you perceive things. And then last but not least, all that goes into your brain and gets interpreted. And it gets interpreted in light not just of those past experiences, not just to your context, but also the narrative that you are telling yourself at any given point.
Mm.
And so if you want to set yourself up to grow, if you want to set yourself up to make a better real world or a more open real world, then you can affect all three of those things. You can affect where you put yourself, the environment that you place yourself in. You can affect the way that those filters allow things through or keep things out. And you can affect the story that you tell, which will help you interpret the input that you're getting in ways that are more meaningful and that are directing you towards the better future that you were designed for. So
Yeah.
that's the myth of the real world in a nutshell.
That's really good. And so my pushback or my question in that is, how do you do that? Because you and I have probably seen plenty of people that we can see that they're stuck.
Mhm.
We know that they're limited thinking, or one of the critical things. Me and my wife were just talking about this morning. Is there seems to be some people that they just believe that this is as good as it's going to get, whatever that is. Could be physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever. Um, but when you're stuck there,
Mhm.
how do you get unstuck? Because it's one thing to say, yes, okay, yes, I should have a different filter, different environment. That could be pretty easy or easier, maybe potentially. But how do I change the story for myself?
Mhm. Yeah, my answer to that is idea. So that's where my
Oh,
framework comes in, right?
nice, nice.
So idea is a pathway that's designed to get you from a limited world to a world of infinite potential, and it starts with identity. So the problem with identity, and I'm going to go back now, you just said a moment ago, you were talking about how there's a certain subset of people who are just want to be subsumed by this artifice that we live in, this artificial world that we live in, and they're just, it's like going into the Matrix, right? It's the red dress, it's the stake in the Matrix, I guess was the metaphor, and they're just happy to live and be there. And I think part of how we get there is we've misunderstood and we mislabeled the way that identity actually works. See, people think that their identity is made up of who they are primarily. I think of my identity, that's who I am. But a lot of people also think of their identity as who they have been in the past. And so as a result, what we have done is we have substituted our past hurts and wounds and trauma and all this stuff that goes along with that, and we've changed that into a series of labels. And we have substituted those labels for our actual identity, because our actual identity is not, in fact, who I've been. It's not even who I am, but our identity is, more importantly, who am I becoming? And so when we are content to slap labels on ourselves about, I am neurodivergent, right? I'm not pointing at anybody in particular, but like
Yeah.
my sex identity, my gender identity, we take all of these and we call them identities, but in fact, what they are is they are labels. They are aspects of us, but they are not us. But culturally, we allow them to become us. And we allow them to become us because it's easy. It's shorthand. If I know that you are, you know, uh, whatever, right? If I know that you are a rich person, I know how to label you. I know how to deal with you because I have a subset of my brain that works on the trigger of rich person. So you got to get out of the idea that who I am is my identity, and into the idea that who I am becoming is who I really am, right? Because bridging that gap is how you get there. And the way that you get there is through creating first disciplines. And disciplines are the things that you do every day to get a little bit better. Now we're back to James Clear. Now we're in all of the places where it's like, okay, what are the things that you're doing every single day that are not just making you better in some random way, but that are actually drawing you closer to the person that you want to become. So first you have to know who that person is. You have to believe in that person. You have to know who that person is. And then you have to go, okay, what on a daily basis can I do that's going to move me a little bit closer to becoming that person? And those are your disciplines. And then execution happens in the big moments. So execution is when you show up. It's when all of those things that you've done to line yourself up, to go in the right direction, come to a fork in the road, and you make a choice, right? So here's your paradigm, right? When you have a choice, the choice is successful when it is rooted in the person that you want to become, and when it is prepared for through the things that you do on a daily basis. So from identity through disciplines into execution, and finally accountability. And with accountability, everybody, of course, always wants to talk about accountability being being accountable to somebody else, right? We want to be accountable to a coach, or we want to be accountable to a mentor, and that's a good thing. That's the starting point. But the end point of accountability is actually becoming accountable to ourselves, and becoming accountable to the path that puts us on the trajectory that makes us become the person that we were designed to become. And so all of those things become cyclical, because when we become accountable to the person that we are becoming, then that cements the identity, and we begin again at the end of the process. So how do we get them from small real world to big real world? Well, through idea is how you change those filters and become that person.
Yeah. But dude, that's so good. It's been interesting because I subscribe to your Substack, your daily devotional thing that you've been doing. Unbelievable. I've texted you several times. I'm like, brother, this is amazing. Like, this is so good. And I can tell that this last must have been it feels like the last like 5 or 10 or somewhere in there has really been on that theme of accountability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been the through line of all of it. But the different angles you're taking on is just so good, because yeah, you're right. Like when you're accountable to somebody else, that's imposed discipline versus the self-discipline thing, right? Where it's imposed discipline, sports, military. I think we need more of that in terms of learning how to have discipline, because when Ray and I talk, his background is awesome. He couldn't be with us today because he's a blast to hang out with. But he's a school counselor at a middle school. He grew up in the Philippines and then Guam, and then immigrated to the United States, and now is a U.S. citizen and all these things. And he's also a football coach, and he had high level achievements in football, and the NFL was looking at him in different places and things. And so the conversations we have are kind of in that vein of, okay, as a school counselor, you're dealing with kids that don't have discipline. Maybe they come from a family background, whatever, that there isn't any discipline in the household because the parents don't know how to hold themselves accountable, right? Or they don't know how to have discipline themselves, and that gets passed on. And then the other side, you're a football coach where you kind of got to be a hard ass, right? You just you're on kids because they want to become better. And I think that's the differentiator that I see, that I wish that I could help define. So maybe as I'm talking, hopefully I'm going to get some wisdom from Andrew in a second on what is that switch inside of people where it's it's got to be this internal driver that, I want to become this, right? This version of who I am now is not the version of who I want to be or who I believe I be, going back to your identity piece. And so what is that switch, or how do you help activate that inside of people to push them? Or is it literally just an internal driver motivator? This is something I've been struggling with. I don't have an answer. That's why I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Yeah, that's a hard one because it goes in a couple of different directions. I think that on the one hand, there are some people who are just motivated. I was kind of one of these people, right? I was always good at things. I was always pretty successful at things. I told you about the sales and the banking thing, and I was always, top grades at all of that stuff. But I was never really great at anything. And a part of that, I think, is that I had not grown up expecting greatness. And you talked a little bit about my book. I have a book that's coming out here, hopefully at the end of the month, if all
Yeah.
the publication stuff works.
Yeah. That's exciting.
But it's called Be Great. It's just called Be Great. And the reason I call it that is the last thing I tell my daughter, who is now 12 also, last thing I say to her every day when she walks out the door for school is, I love you, be great. And she rolls her eyes because that's what 12-year-olds do. But she always says, okay, I will. I love you. I will. And the reason that I tell her that is because I grew up in a family that loved the heck out of me and gave me everything that I needed, but nobody ever told me to be great. Nobody ever, I grew up in the Midwest. Like before we moved to California, until I went to high school, we lived in the Midwest, and it was very much a like, be humble, keep your head down, do your job, but it was never, hey, shoot for the stars. Like, be great. Get out there and be great. The best thing that you could hope to do was just be good. And so I came into life with that mentality. And when I was in those other fields, sales and the finance world, I looked around me and I saw a lot of people who were happy with good. And there's a scene in the Willy Wonka movie, the newest one, where they're walking through this zoo and there's these flamingos, right? And the little girl who is with Willy Wonka says, I wonder why the flamingos don't just fly away, because there's no like roof on him. And he says, maybe just it's never occurred to them that they could. Maybe flamingos just need to be taught how to fly. And there came a time when I intersected with Erwin McManus and with the Arena and some other key figures in that world, when all of a sudden I looked at the people who were around me on the Arena calls and in the other places that I was, and I realized that there was a pathway to being great, to not just being okay, but to making a real impact on people that would last and that would maintain, not for the sense of building myself up, but because honestly, I believe that I was created to do something in the world. I believe everybody was created to do something in the world. And I think that when we settle for less than doing the most that we can, when we're defining our ceiling by a limitation that's imposed by just whatever is okay, that we're actually doing a disservice to our created design. And so that's a lot where a lot of the devotion comes from. That's where a lot of those things come from. But so to answer your question in a very, very long way, on the one hand, I think there are people who have that moment where they wake up and they realize, hold on, why I'm a flamingo, but I have wings. Like, why am I not flying? So I think there are some people that have that wake up experience. And I think there are some other people who come into the presence of someone who sees it in them. Now, this is where where your coaches come in, right? Your
Right.
great football coaches are not the ones who necessarily have been great football players. The great football coaches are the ones who look at people, who understand where they could be, and who help reveal that place to that player, right? I'm a Nebraska football fan for whatever that's worth. Unfortunately, I'm sorry you just lost viewers when I said that,
It's all good. I live
but
in Oregon Ducks and Oregon Beavers. So
hey, I'm a huge
yeah.
Ducks fan. My wife is from that area too. So, and I'm glad they're in the Big Ten now. But that's one of the things I respect about Matt Rule, the coach of the Nebraska Cornhuskers, the football team, is that's what he says nonstop. Is he says, when you're looking at these young guys coming in, you're not looking at them, you're looking at their whole future, and your main job is just to show them how to get there. And I love that, and I think that's the other side of it. Some people wake up to it themselves. Other people need somebody to believe in it for them for a little while
Yeah, yeah.
until they're able to see it.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, one of the next book that I'm going to be working on is the title is going to be Mentor Coach Lead, and the idea is that the idea of mentorship is the best way I've ever heard it put was that a mentor is somebody that pours the best of them inside of you, right? Like it's the learning from
Mhm.
somebody else, and a coach is somebody that draws the best of you out of you,
Mhm.
right? And that is what leadership is, where you're pouring into people, you're drawing out of people, you're casting vision, you're doing the things that you know Maxwell, ad nauseum. There's plenty of leadership books out there,
Mhm.
but it's that idea of being able to pour the best into people and then to draw the best out of them. And sometimes that's
100%.
a kick in the butt, right? And sometimes that does look like empathy and giving somebody a hug and being like, you don't have to be here, right? You don't have to be stuck like this.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then give them a kick in the butt because they need to get past that. So with the book coming out, that's end of the month. Is that
End of the month if all things go well. Yeah. Yeah, it should
man?
be
That is so
available on
cool.
Amazon. Yeah.
That is well, yeah, for sure, of course, yeah. That is super exciting though. That is super exciting. So I guess in that vein, like, what are the next things? Because you're talking about the identity and who you're becoming. So what does the ideal state of Andrew Burkum look like 30 years from now? Like where are you going, and what are the next big things that you're wanting to see?
30 years is a long time. One of the things the first questions I always ask clients when they want to come in and be coached by me is, let's not look at your 5-year plan. Tell me, if you have everything you need, if you get all the coaching you want and all the resources and blah blah blah, all the things, we do all the things. What does your life look like in a year, right? What does
Mm,
it look
yeah,
like in a year? So I don't know what my life looks like in 30 years, but I'll tell you, in a year, what I am hoping to be able to do is I'm hoping to be able to expand the reach of what we do at IDEA. Right now, we're really venturing into, like I said, I've spent a lot of time in the nonprofit sector as we've launched the business. We're moving very heavily into the educational sector in the next year, and man, I'll tell you what, there is nobody like the educators who are out there, but they don't have resources and they don't have the level of support that they need
yeah,
to
for
really,
sure.
really grow. And that's, I think, why you see so many of them burn out, is that they hit a level and then there's no support there anymore for them to grow past it. And so we're making great partnerships with county offices of education, with local schools and districts to be able to help develop and coach with people who are working directly with kids in education. Really, really excited about that. So
Very cool.
a year out, I think that's probably a huge piece of the work that we're doing. As for me, I hope to have completed my second book, which will be on the
Hey,
myth of the real world specifically. And I hope that will be ready to go in a year. And more than anything, um, I in a year or in 30 years, if we're going 30 years and we want to look back, right? If we want to look back at a life lived, I'm 51, right? So 30 years, I'm 81. Who knows if I'm still around? But if I want to look back at a life in 30 years and say, yeah, I did the thing, what I want to see is the same thing that I wanted to see when I was a manager in banking, when I was a manager in sales, when I've been a leader anywhere. What I want to be able to do is look back and see the people that moved to the next place that they wanted to be, that I got to be a part of the story. I can tell you the name of almost every single person who got a promotion or who became a manager or who started their own business from all of those years that I was working and coaching people in those industries. And I think that in 30 years, a life well lived looks back at those things and says, okay, all of those faces are there still with me, and I have fulfilled the part of my design that was called to help.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's cool. One of the questions that Ray and I have been mulling over, and we wanted to ask people is, again, in the vein of the choice, is if you think back on your life up until this point, what is one of the most difficult choices that you've had to make, and what was the outcome of that? And then to counter that, my wife also said, okay, if it's not a choice, sometimes people don't have a choice. Sometimes stuff just happens to people. And so what is a difficult thing that you've had to go through, and what in that growth phase, because I'm a firm believer in you only, I think you go through the biggest growth when you're going through the biggest challenges, right? When you're in the middle of one of the hardest things you've ever done, and that's going to grow you an accelerated pace more than probably anything else. So for you, what were those markers, those things, whether it was a difficult choice or whether it was a difficult thing that grew you in an accelerated way, has made you who you are today?
There have been an awful lot of things along the way, but the one that I frequently point back to is the one that turned my trajectory in the first place. And we talked about it earlier in the podcast when we talked about that first ministry position that I had down in North Orange, North Orange County, California, that I got fired from. And the story behind that is, like I said, my dad's been a pastor my whole life. I come from that pedigree. That's my whole world. I went to a Bible college expecting fully to go into that field. And so coming out of school, in between the Hollywood stuff, I took a position. I got a position as an assistant pastor at this little church up in North Orange County, and I came in hot. I knew exactly how everything was going to go. I knew what needed to be changed. I knew how everything needed to be fixed, and I did all of the things wrong. I did not make the allies that I needed to. I did not make the friends. I didn't lead the team that I had been given to lead. And I didn't even recognize, as people started to kind of back away from me because they could see the lightning coming long before I did, that was going to strike. I didn't even see that coming. And as a result, 18 months into this first leadership position, really, that I'd had, I was told when I was fired in an email in 1998, which was, email was barely a thing.
Yeah.
But I was fired in this email, and I can still see the last line of the email, which said, it's obvious based on what we've seen that you don't have what it takes to lead. And that was a moment where everything that I had thought about myself
Mm.
came kind of tumbling down and collapsing. And that was the beginning of where I realized that identity is the beginning of all growth. That figuring out who you are and who you want to become, more importantly, is the beginning of all growth. Because when that happened, my identity collapsed. It was
Oh
all
yeah.
built
Mm.
around, this is who I am, this is what I'm supposed to do, this is what I'm called to do, this is what I was born to do. And when all of that is gone and you're told, no, you can't do it, and not only that, you're not cut out for it, you've got to figure things out real fast. And I was fortunate that at that time I had a friend who was involved with Mosaic, with Erwin McManus's church down in Los Angeles, and he was also in the performing arts work that I was doing at the time. And he said, "Hey, it's your time. It's your time to come to Mosaic." So the choice that I made, right, because the decision was I could have stayed in that low spot, and I could have kind of wandered my way into some other little church and, sat in the pews and done, whatever volunteer service that I could. And but this guy dragged me to Mosaic in Los Angeles, and I did not want to go because I knew it was big, but I at the same time I thought, okay, it's big, I can probably disappear. That'll be cool. And the first week that I went, this guy introduced me to some of the members of the production crew there who do the production on the for the Sunday morning events. And then like the next week, I got a call from the team lead, and he said, "Hey, with your experience, working in directing and things like that, we would really like you to come in and help direct on Sunday mornings." And I said, I do not want to do this, but the decision was, do I go and do I just sit, or do I answer the call? And there was something in that moment that was defiant that said, if you do not answer the call now, you never will. And so I said, "All right, fine. What could possibly go wrong, right?" And so yeah, so I got involved with the production team. I got an opportunity to lead a small team there, and they were amazing. I learned so much about how to be the right kind of leader, about how to build the right kind of teams, and how to integrate what I knew into the direction that things needed to go. And things went upward from there. So I guess if you're asking me what was the choice was not to diminish. The
Mm.
choice was not to de-escalate because I had taken a hit. The choice was to answer the call when the call came, and I was fortunate that it came as quickly as it did. So,
Man, yeah, that's amazing. And that was when, I mean, Mosaic was pretty. I mean, they're mobile again now. They're
mhm.
moving around, but it was pretty mobile in late '90s, I think.
Yeah, late '90s. It was super awesome. We had I mean, this was back when we were in the nightclub downtown,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
we
Yeah,
had a service that was at a high school out in San Gabriel, and yeah, it was an awesome time. It was, I love all of the iterations of Mosaic throughout the years. I've always, no matter where I've gone, I've always followed them, and I love all of the iterations. But I really think that body is at its best when it's on the move, because I think there's a very deep metaphor there that they don't stop and they don't settle down. That they are always moving to the next thing, and there's something fitting about not always having a home. Now, I want them to find a place. I want them to have all of the things that they need. But I'm excited for this time. I think it's going to be good for them.
yeah, that's so cool. That is so cool. Yeah, because I think first met Erwin. I must have been 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. He was speaking at a conference, and anyway, but it was kind of the same way. Like, I bebopped in and out of churches and different things, and then moved to several states. But it was always like this through line is always there was always Mosaic, right? There's always like Irwin and Mosaic, and to go back and listen. And then all the stuff that he went through in business and collapsing, and it was kind of an interesting trajectory because a couple years after that, I went through a similar like my crash, and then saying, okay, well, if he bucked up and carried on, then I guess I don't have an excuse to, right? And I think it goes back to the thing you were saying that sometimes people just need a role model, an example, something where, okay, this thing happened for this person and they decided to move forward anyway. So I guess I can move forward too, right? And sometimes you do need that direct, somebody to come into your life and say, hey, you can do this. This too
Hmm.
shall pass. Let's get
Hmm.
up. Let's move it. Let's keep going. Yeah, that's so cool. So as you go in and you had this time to reflect, obviously, over the last couple decades of what you would tell your 24-year-old self that got fired and all the learnings and things. So one of the things that we had talked about is the working genius model. Like, how did you stumble across that? I have my own story there, but yeah, how did that come to be? And then because now you're a certified coach or however that works with Lencioni and that thing. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So yeah, interesting. So I mentioned that I had come out of the finance world in the post-pandemic year. I had come out of the finance world and had gone into nonprofit work. And as I was working in the nonprofit world, I realized that, hey, I'm going to be back in, back in a leadership spot where things are totally different for me. I'm on completely new ground. So I thought, well, I'd better brush up on my leadership stuff. And the organization that I was with went through a time where the CEO very abruptly, retired unexpectedly, and just had some things that he had to go off and do, and there was this huge vacuum of leadership. And so myself and one of the other guys that was there, who's a good friend of mine, who's now the CEO of that organization, we looked at each other and said, we gotta hold this thing together somehow. There's too much good work to be done. And so that little team of people held together and did the best we could, but I knew that I needed to brush up on my leadership skills. I knew that was going to be really important. And so started reading, started listening to podcasts, went back to Maxwell, and was just listening to random podcasts that were recommended to me, Groeschel and a bunch of the other guys. And one day I see a podcast and it's about the genius of invention. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let's see what that is. So I listened to it, and it's the Working Genius podcast. And I thought, oh, this is kind of a thing. So I got the book and I read it, and I thought, this is it, man. This is
Yeah.
this is exactly the way that work works. And so I called up the guy who was the CFO of the company at the time, and I said, man, you got to read this book. So he reads the book over the weekend, and he calls me up on Monday and says, hey, I took my assessment. Here's what I am. What are you? And I said, I don't know, man. I just got through the book myself. So I took the assessment, and then we ended up giving it to everybody in the organization, and things clicked like crazy. When people understood all of a sudden, not only how they approached work naturally, but how the people around them approached work, and also the things that created drag in each individual's workspace, all of a sudden the chess pieces started getting moved around, and people started getting just repositioned, re-energized. And I'll tell you what, that organization, that was at that time, it was 12 people. It was, budget was probably $1 million a year. I mean, it wasn't a bankrupt. It is a well-known name in the nonprofit world. But today, that organization employs over 60 people
Wow.
and runs about a $10 million budget, most of which is redistributed directly into the community.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, they are doing insane, crazy things with that. I mean, they in the Central California market, where housing is everything. They housed in a very small town. They housed 145 families in the last year.
Whoa.
Just got people into homes that would have been on the streets. And one of the biggest reasons for that is, to this day, they are using an approach that says, how do we position somebody not only to be in a job that they could have, but in a job that works with their design?
Yeah.
And that's what the Working Genius framework is all about. And that's why I got certified as a facilitator. And it's the number one tool that I use to get in the door with any, when I talk about working in education, the reason that I'm in the educational field is because they heard that I'm a Working Genius facilitator. They invited me in, and now we have all kinds of relationships because it simply works. It just
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good. Yeah.
Mhm.
The interesting thing, I reached out to somebody, I can't remember who it was exactly, but that I love asking the question, like, what's the best book or you've read in the last couple of years? And that was the book that they came with. If you haven't read it, you have to. And I love Lencioni's stuff. I use 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I've used that in organizations for a long time. And so when I was like, well, that sounds great. And I read it. And so I gave it to my cousin, Kevin, who's, my 2 cousins own all these companies in Oregon. And so he read it and then just gave the assessment to everybody. Like, didn't tell them about it, didn't read the order of the book. Everybody just took this assessment. And so then we get together and he's like, well, here's everybody's stuff. And I was like, okay, well, did you read the book? Did anybody read the book? Does anybody know what's going on? And so it was just it was kind of a funny introduction to it. But the thing that I find most fascinating, because the same way I recommend the book all the time. But the thing that I find most fascinating for me is I seem to find more insight from people's working frustrations
Mhm.
than their geniuses. especially if there's a misalignment, or a mismatch of, okay, this person, their frustration is tenacity, but you literally have them on the phones and checking email all day,
Mhm.
every day. Like that is going to drive them nuts.
Right. Right.
And they're going to quit
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they, you know,
Even
so
if they don't, they just won't be as productive as somebody who loves to do those things, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think that interesting, and I've been using this as well as I talk to leaders about delegation, because I find with some people either they love to delegate everything or they love to delegate. So it seems like there's two types of people. One is that they love to delegate everything that they hate, and they just delegate to whomever. And then those that are like, well, I don't want to delegate this because it sucks, and I better do the sucky work because I'm the boss. But helping them realize just because it sucks the soul out of you does not mean it sucks the soul out of other people.
Right.
And
Right.
so you're actually doing people a disservice if you are not giving them the work that is actually going to fit them uh, and their mold. But I'd love to hear your insights on that, like as you've gone and facilitated. And I mean, there's so many light bulb moments I'm sure that come in. But what is your like? Is there like an overarching takeaway as you've been doing this facilitation work?
Yeah, I think you hit on it, that it's as important to examine people's frustrations as it is to examine their geniuses. Uh, You know, we know that people are most productive when they're working in an area that actually drives internal energy. That just makes sense, right? I mean, if you're gonna have intrinsic motivation, you're going to do better at the job than if somebody's gotta take the stick to you every day. Um, but but when we are able to look at people and say, "Oh, I'll use myself as an example, right? You put me in a room full of paperwork that has to be filled out, and I'll come out of that room eventually. I may not be happy, but I'll come out of it eventually, and it will probably be done, but maybe not, because I have a frustration and tenacity, right? And here's where that rubs most people, is that the story I told myself for much of my life, because I have a tenacity frustration, is that I was lazy. Because my dad has a tenacity genius. He's a wonder tenacity. So he really loves
Wonder tenacity,
yeah,
really?
right. So, but the top end of the spectrum and the bottom end of
Yeah.
the spectrum. So he really loves like asking the big questions, thinking about the big theological ideas, and he also loves getting things finished, which is the genius of tenacity, getting them over the finish line. Well, me, I can't get things over the finish line. It's really hard. I mean, I can do it. I've built systems over the years, but it's really, really hard for me. So my internal story was, man, you are lazy. You cannot get this stuff done to save your life. And when I was introduced to the working genius model, what I realized is you're not lazy. You're just designed for a whole different subset of things. Because for me, I have the genius of discernment. The genius of discernment is using your gut, using your pattern recognition to make good decisions, to analyze and evaluate things, often in the absence of a lot of really, really clear data. So what I realized is that I might not be good at getting that room full of paperwork done, but, when my dad and I go to a fast food restaurant, I can order in about 30 seconds, whereas it will sometimes take him 10 to 15 minutes to figure out what to order, right? Because he doesn't have the genius of discernment. We're two different people. We both have accomplished good and great things in our lives, but we're wired to do it in different ways. And when you give people the license to be wired differently, then you unlock a whole new way for them to look at their jobs. And too often we act in the way that we think we have to act to have the job that we need to do. But if we are able to step back and say, okay, but what's the best way for me to do the job? That's when sometimes we unlock people's potential. So that's kind of the big thing for me.
That's cool. Two questions that came to mind. One was, as you're working in the education field, Ray and I have this conversation a lot about how, with the advent of AI and things like that, education is going to have to change. It's going to
Mm,
have to change, I think, pretty dramatically.
yep.
In that, uh, as I think of like teachers, they all essentially have to do the same job. And I guess in the same vein, I work with a lot of companies that are in the trades. It's a big concrete contractor, stuff like that. So when you have people that are leadership roles, they're bidding, things like that, the working geniuses seems to work. But when you have people that are just literally doing the work every day, right?
Hmm.
I don't know how well it works with that because it's not, hey, we can't wonder about this necessarily. We just got to freaking
Mhm,
move. We got to frame this house,
mhm.
whatever the thing is. So I guess in that vein, like, how do you help people that have a similar job, similar role, or is it just that they approach the work differently? Do you know what I'm saying there? Does that
Yeah,
question make sense?
100%. And the word approach is the key. It's all about work approach. You know, we say it in the Working Geniuses all the time that all work is six-letter work. So there are six types of working genius, there are six types of work, and all six types of work are required in any project. In anything that you do, you've got to go through wonder. You've got to ask the questions to make sure that you're solving the right problem. You've got to invent. You've got to actually solve the problem, right? You've got to come up with solutions. You have to discern. You've got to be able to figure out which of those solutions actually, actually is the one that's going to go. You have to galvanize people to get them moving, to get them on the same page, and to get them going forward. You need enablement, which is says I'm now going to step up and do what needs to be done, whatever it is. I'm going to step in and do it. And you need tenacity, which is finishing the thing, right? You need all six of those steps in any work that you do. But when I'm a teacher in a classroom, for example, and I know that maybe I have the two high elevation geniuses, wonder and invention, right? Then I know that I'm going to I'm going to approach everything from the idea of a very, very high elevation. I'm going to be solving problems. I'm going to be thinking about the question behind the question, about the context, about all of the things that go into that. But there is going to come a time when I need to leave those things behind. And I need to kind of suppress that natural tendency in order to bring it down into enablement, where I'm sitting with the student and helping them in the way that they need to be helped. And when I move to tenacity, now the key to that we are finding within the educational environment is because education in the United States is still it's still a product of the Industrial Revolution,
Right, right.
right?
Yep.
Because we're still building factory workers in the 21st century, for some reason. That teachers are taught how to teach, but at some level they're never addressed again as individual contributors in
Hmm.
the business of teaching.
Right.
And so, unlike the business world that you and I have dealt with in some cases where development is just an expectation,
Yes.
professional development in the teaching world is a dirty word because they bring everybody. That means that once a semester, they bring everybody into a room and go through their Myers-Briggs test for the 15th time, right? And nobody actually gets developed out of it. But when you bring it to a place where you're looking across either a school, right, where you have a principal who's leading and then all the way down through a staff, or in many times I work with county teams that actually have teams that go out. But when you look across the team, you start to see the connections between people, and you start to understand that I may have a weakness, not a weakness, but I may have a frustration in tenacity. But guess what? The person who's sitting in the office next to me, that's what they're really good at. And not only are they really good at it, they love it. And so maybe there's a way we build a partnership. Now, maybe it's not, hey, I give them all my paperwork and it gets done, but maybe it's just we do paperwork together when we can, because their energy will drive me in ways that it wouldn't, right? And
Well,
so
that's a
it's
good.
it's finding those partnerships in non-traditional environments where you wouldn't normally partner people up, where you would think about having people solo workers. That's what seems to have been most meaningful in the educational space, and that's where we're
Interesting.
headed.
Hmm. That's really good. That's really good. And now in the same vein, it's kind of a different tangent, but it's kind of in the same vein. So years ago, I was down in Ecuador, and we
Mhm.
were wanting to work with schools, orphanages, and stuff. And we ended up going to this school. I can't remember what part, but it was really interesting in that it was a boarding school. Half of the kids, it was a Christian organization that ran it, and half of the kids were basically the wealthiest of the wealthy. You know,
Mhm.
the lawyers, the doctors, whomever. And then the other half were kids off the street that were homeless for all intents and purposes. And when they came to the school, you weren't allowed to know who was who. And so, but then what they did is when they brought these kids in, and obviously there's a lottery and they do this cool thing that, right? And you're getting all these kids together. But the thing that was amazing to me is everybody had the same education until about fifth grade. And then at the fifth grade, then they figured out, okay, how is this person bent? Are they more scientifically, mathematically minded? Are they more driven in biology? You know, like what are the things that they actually care about? Like you're saying, like you just have that. I heard it put Einstein time once, where it's time is relative, and you can work in something forever for hours, and it feels like minutes, and then vice versa. You do something for 5 minutes, and it feels like 12 hours. And so finding the ways, and so that they basically took those students and then helped develop the curriculum around that person instead of, like you're saying, like the Industrial Revolution. And yes, we're still stamping out factory workers. Not right. It's not super helpful. So, have you thought about that? Like, how have you seen, or what have your thoughts on, like, how could the education system change, especially as we need to adapt, and you're working with teams and all that. Yeah. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. The fact of the matter is, it's going to have to change. It's absolutely going to have to change. I am not. Um, I am not without hope for our education system, I guess would be the best way to say it. I see enough people in the system that still care, that I think it can be saved. I think it can be changed, and I think the key is beginning to look at students as individuals, and starting to move towards skill-based education rather than just strictly knowledge-based education. Here's the problem: as with all things, we have politicized education, and so you cannot walk into a room and talk about public education without immediately politicizing that room. And until we move it beyond the realm of the theoretical and back into a place where we understand that it's actually it's trite to say that it's the future of the country or of the world, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the world around you, and if you look at the generations that are coming up and you don't like what you see, then the fact that you haven't taken action to date makes you complicit in everything that they are. We make the generations that come behind us.
Right.
And if we do not stop using education as a tool for political gain in one direction or the other, we're gonna make a generation of people that are gonna be dangerous, because they're gonna wake up someday, and it's gonna be a revolution, but in one way or another. But yeah, the answer to that, I really do think, is individuality. How do we move back towards seeing students as individuals? How do we move back towards working with them? I mean, with their working geniuses, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do we look at the way that they're designed and figure out how to direct them towards the best version of themselves, not the best version of whatever the boilerplate is?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Obviously, I mean, that's way harder. I mean, that's why that I can't remember when I was in Ecuador. It must have been 2008. I mean, it was a while ago. It's been a while, but that stuck with me for all these years because it was such a unique approach to
Hmm.
education. Because then, as I saw, right, the little kids, yeah, you need to learn to read and write, right, reading, writing, arithmetic, right, and then but then as you grew, it was really cool to see, because then I met individual students, and they were literally on totally different trajectories. Like one kid was very much into like engineering and like had a really mechanical aptitude and was
Hmm.
really interested in how do we fix things, how do we make things, those
Hmm.
types of things. And then some that were just unbelievable thinkers, right? Like philosophers, those types of things. And they're in ninth grade, 10th grade, something like that. But it's the same school, but they're completely different ways that they're going. And it was really cool to see, and not to necessarily pigeonhole them, but again, it was more like we're drawing out what are the geniuses inside of them, and then how do we help facilitate that? How do we figure out what their bent is, and then really support them? And I would imagine it takes a lot more energy. It's a lot easier just boilerplate stuff,
Of
right?
course. Of
And
course.
to put 50 kids in a classroom, and then everybody's going to do this thing, and then we standardize it. But I don't know if that's necessarily the way of the future. And that's where I think like there's some part of me, like we were talking about, like artificial intelligence and things. I think there's probably a way that could help, meaning that you don't need a teacher to deal with 50 kids at the same time,
Hmm.
right? You could help offload some of these things
Hmm.
to draw out the best of people.
Yeah.
So I don't know where I'm
Yeah.
going with that, but
No, I think
conversation.
that's really good and it's really interesting. There's a lot of fear and panic around AI in education right now, but
Yeah, I bet.
but going back to our earlier conversation, when they begin to embrace it as a tool
Yes.
instead of a replacement, I think that's when the shift will come, and maybe that gets us closer to individualized education.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing I tell people all the time is I would joke with when the internet was kind of in its infancy and my grandma would come to me at church and say, "Hey, Jason, I got this off the internet." I was like, "Okay, grandma, well, where on the internet?"
Right, right.
Those types of things. And in the same way, when people come to me and say, "Well, ChatGPT says this," I said, "Okay, well, you got to bring your brain with you still. Like, you have to push back on this because where are their sources and what is that coming from and what is the bias and where did that come from?" Like you were saying, being strategically cynical, I guess is maybe a good way to say it, right?
Absolutely.
Where and why is this information being perpetrated and where's it coming from and who are the backers and funders and whatever, right?
Hmm.
So that you can just see through it a little bit and say, okay, well, there is an agenda in everything, right? There's
Hmm.
bias and things. So how do we suss that out enough so that we can make better decisions for ourselves in who we are and what we believe, and all those kinds of things. Well, Andrew, I just realized, dude, we could talk for another 2 hours. Like,
Hey,
but
yeah,
I just
no kidding.
I just looked at the clock. I was like, "Oh snap! I gotta wrap this up because I got another meeting in 10 minutes." But
Oh gosh.
Andrew, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much. And yeah, we're gonna have to do this again. It would be really fun to have Ray on as well. Yeah, and you guys, it'd be really cool to hear you guys talk about education from the standpoint of what would be helpful, maybe to him in administration,
Hmm.
helping schools. But then in the same way, the things that he's really passionate about is getting these tools back into the hands of parents because he worked in a group home for a number of years. He said, man, it comes back to the parents. Like the teachers can only do as much as they can do. But if we
Amen.
can give these tools to the parents so that they get better and they can push things, like that is going to go, in his opinion, further. I think he's probably right. So but anyway, hey brother, this has been awesome. Thanks so much.
Hey, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate it. It's always any excuse I can get to talk to you is always a good one. But thanks for having me on.